want me to self-introduce, or do you want
No,
to?
I'll do it.
Okay.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to a new ForoCompetencia breakfast. We have today Professor Danny Sokol, who will be speaking to us about digital regulation, AI, and competition. He will be giving the US vision, and this will be part of a trilogy, at least. We're going to have next month Sandra Marco Colino giving the Chinese perspective and experience, and the month after, in September, we are going to have Pablo Ibáñez Colomo giving the European perspective. So without further introduction, Danny, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So again, I'm wearing Argentine colors. Wishing the team well. Thank you for having me. I'm giving an overview of the US, but I will do a little bit of comparison just to explain both what's going on in the United States and what's a little bit different in Europe that we've seen. And we'll be dealing largely with merger and conduct. There's a lot to go through, but please, at any time, feel free to just interrupt, ask questions. It's better if it's a conversation. So I'll speak for roughly 40 minutes, and then the rest will have official Q&A, but again, it doesn't have to proceed that way. I'm happier if I don't get past the second slide and we just have a conversation. The first major difference, the US relative to both China, to a certain extent, Japan, most prominently, and both Europe and UK, we don't have a regulatory regime. And I'll work through why that exists and why it doesn't make sense. Frankly, it's not clear that it's worked in the other jurisdictions, and there are reasons to believe it, in fact, didn't. One issue that we hear constantly is like, oh, there's no enforcement. That's been false. So I want to go to, it depends. What are we measuring, right? World Cup, we know. You score, you have a goal, that's the unit of measurement. That's great. Beyond that, when we try to look at, say, player efficiency, we have differences. So we've seen enforcement working in terms of successful cases. So I'll work you through the successful cases. Some of these were close cases. Some of these were obvious cases. Some of the cases were lost. Some of the cases that were lost should have been lost and should have never been brought in the first place. There are probably other cases there that are sort of lurking, and the question is, it remains to be seen. So there are both cases going through the pipeline and then potential cases that may be happening soon. Then we'll actually literally just go through the cases. And next, we'll go through the empirical record, specifically with regards to Europe, for which we don't have peer-reviewed papers, so we get anecdotes so far. And then China, where we do have a clear empirical record. And then I thought to close by focusing on competition in AI, and that means everyone has a messy meme with themselves standing next to him. I may, in fact, have one of those as well, but I did not put it up because I realized that it would make Julian jealous. So it turns out the U.S. enforcement system works. There was an effort, and by the way, it continues today as well, for EE.UU to try to create regulation. Each time it's been reintroduced, it gets even less and less support. And now Klobuchar would like to be governor of Minnesota, and she has to say that she's done something. But in fact, the bill is bad. The bill has always been bad. It's never even gotten as far as a floor vote. There have been other attempts at legislation, one for App Store access, no real traction there. And part of it is because we've had App Store cases, successful cases. What exactly the success looked like, we'll get to. Um, we had the Access Act, didn't go far. We had one that was rent seeking on behalf of news organizations. That wasn't passed. I would actually argue that the Australian media code was successful rent seeking by Rupert Murdoch. And one of the reasons it didn't work is because the US tends not to believe so much in ex ante. Enforcement typically works, but also as we thought about competition, I think things have changed. Number one, we're no longer in a neo-Brandeisian world. The world we're in, I don't know how to describe. I think there are many things I can say about the current contemporary world. We'll just say there's a lot more uncertainty, but there is not some kind of generalizable theory, at least in the United States. But where we do see significant legislative efforts are other things. AI, um, for which, by the way, we still don't have AI legislation in the United States. We have an executive order. We have some movement within agencies, but what exactly are we thinking about AI? Unclear. In the meantime, under the last pope, who of course was Argentine, I have to mention that, we had not one but two papal bulls. The first one after the deep fake with him in the white poofy jacket, and under the current pope again, concern about the effects of AI. We don't have anything yet really significant in the United States. So then the question is, what do we see? Well, we've had our traditional antitrust statutes. We've had action by both DOJ and FTC, plus our state AGs, and on digital platform, the most contemporary case is what happened yesterday. 12 states decided to sue Paramount for the acquisition of Time Warner. Let's wait and see how that looks like. States are active, so we have Live Nation, another platform case that states won. We had HPE Juniper, a lot to be said about that, but we'll find out more with the with what comes out in the review. Allegedly highly political. We'll know the truth soon. We've got a lot of very, very active private action, both class action and traditional company to company, of which the most important has been Epic, and I'll go through Epic. So there we have both Epic Apple, which shows the importance of state antitrust law because they lost all the federal claims, but they won on the state claim. And then Epic v. Google, where they won, and we'll get to why they won in one and not the other. And you know, there are the traditional reasons of why we like enforcement rather than regulation. This has been particularly important in the United States, but I think it gives us lessons elsewhere in the world. I know in Brazil there's digital regulation that's been introduced. What we've seen so far, regulation generally, we'll get to the DMA. I had my own empirical work on China, but if we see overall the regulatory impacts of Europe, right? The old joke is the U.S. innovates, China imitates, and Europe regulates. But what we know from Draghi and everything since is that Europe is not in good shape. And part of it is, I think, this sense that you need to regulate. There was a last fall at the Northwestern Antitrust Economics Conference, someone from the commission said, we did something. We decided to regulate. And the response from the economists is, choosing to regulate isn't the right question. The question is, did you actually solve the harms? Are there benefits? And there was silence, and it was awkward. By the way, if someone comes to USC, I would not ask such a difficult question. You're my guest, and we respect. So I want to go through what happened. I think, look, do we need to have enforcement in the space? Absolutely. Have there been some good cases? Absolutely. But there are a set of trade-offs. So number one, why did it work differently in the US? Number one, we had enforcement, both against sexy big tech and sort of other companies that are big and tech companies, just not big tech. And we found, and there were some close cases. So a Google search case was close. And how can I prove it to you? Because if you actually look at the first Google search case, not the remedies case, but uh, the the thinking is very well done by the judge, but there's a lot of uncertainty that the judge knows that there's certain quality element. There are good reasons why Google, how Google search works, et cetera. So that it was a close case. So close cases, I think these are defensible. It's the crazy cases that we don't seem to, for the most part, have. And these were remarkable cases because there had been a time that we hadn't really had strong Section 2 cases. We had really bad Section 2 cases as well. The most important one was FTC versus Meta. We never, frankly, got to the conduct because of market definition issues. And you saw that the world had, frankly, changed. For those people wondering how markets change, this is a great case to read. And there was basically no monopoly power. And I have 3 children, so I was experiencing this firsthand. None of them use Facebook. They use Instagram only to show photos of every restaurant they've gone to, but frankly, they're on TikTok a lot. And this was great in part for competition purposes. Number one, we had great experimental economics evidence, and we had really nice evidence looking at app downloads, app substitution. This was really nicely done from the economics perspective. And really the Meta's economists and Meta's lawyers really did a spectacular job. The other thing that emerges, and this is mostly from the Google cases, generative AI is changing the nature of search. I think even more so now than when that decision came out.
A moça que sempre vem para você não veio hoje, não?
Maybe we can, yeah. So this is another reason to suggest sometimes you have real conduct issues, but the question is, does the market move? And here the market seems to be moving. And AI entry is very real. And I think that's another lesson. AI is changing things. So where's another area where they think this is going to emerge? Think of agentic AI and AI shoppers. And this can mean something in the collusion cases, but this can also mean something in cases just dealing with, I hate the word e-commerce because for the same reason I hate the word e-discovery. All discovery is e-discovery. All commerce is e-commerce, even if it's just a specialty store down the street. They probably have a website. They probably have some kind of third-party delivery / fulfillment, and they're using it for both and discovery of customers, but they're also using it to get product beyond their small store. So I think that's going to be a hot and sexy issue going forward. So there are limits to how we think about error costs, but it should be something we think about. So I'm not going to tell you anything you haven't seen before, which is that litigation is different. You actually need to see proof of harm. Technology shifts over time. So in a world of designations, you're kind of stuck. The way we work through remedies tend to be highly tailored and limited in time. I think this is not a design flaw. This is the beauty of the enforcement system, and it's easier to change bad rules. Once we have a codified scheme, it's much harder to change. And if Europe wants to be a museum albeit a great museum with amazing food court, whether Spanish or Italian or Greek, or surprisingly British food has even got, but not traditional British food. I mean, sort of like thank God for the colonies. But that's fine, but that's not where you go to innovate. And we know this from venture capital. We know this just overall. I mean, it's staggering how little Europe has been innovating. And given the size, I mean, you can give all kinds of excuses, but when much smaller countries have much more innovation, when we look at number of unicorns, etc., it's embarrassing. And I mean, much, much smaller. Singapore, Israel, for example, have massive numbers of unicorns. You look at founders. We're looking at other economies that are significantly smaller. Even Korea, Japan. It's not something to be proud of. Again, the culinary tradition, something to be very proud of. The literature, very proud of. But innovation in the last 25 years, not something to be proud of. So I'm going to go just through some very quickly. Just if we do back and forth, I love to have compare and contrast type things. Why DMA or to a certain extent DMCCA versus US model, just basic differences. What do you need? Who decides? How easy is it to fix errors? Enforcement, the risk to innovation, and who bears burdens of proof are going to be different. I'm not saying anything we don't already know, but I just put it up there to explain some of the differences. I want to instead just focus on the enforcement because Julian wants me focusing on the US experience. But I think we've seen some really, really interesting cases, and we see some cases right now in the pipeline, of which I think the most important, when I'm going to leave aside the AI collusion cases for a second and just focus on the last of the sexy companies, because everyone says, oh, the big four. What about the big five? Yes, there's a Microsoft investigation by the FTC, and so that is sexy because Microsoft's been sexy for a long time. Although it's involving enterprise software, that's less sexy than, say, search or app stores. But we can have different kinds of sex appeal. So what's worked? It turns out refusals to deal, duties to deal, it's very hard to win those cases in the United States. So when we've seen cases, what's worked is generally the areas of law where the case law is a bit friendlier, exclusive dealing, tying, some bundling cases. They tend to be focused on the actual contracts. And we also tend to have some bad documents. And when we get to Live Nation, like literally the worst documents since Bizarre Voice. I mean, horrifically bad documents. We had the Google search case. It looks like the payments to Apple seem to matter. Like there's something interesting going on there. With Live Nation, the bad documents, including some senior executive saying we need to be robbing them blind. Okay, you know what? That does not help you if you are if you're a litigator, and that's some of the documents that emerge. And ad tech, the particular mechanisms were things that they could document. Whatever you think about the cases, I think we could say here we had theories, we had some economic evidence, and we actually had documents. And I think documents help to tell the story, but that alone doesn't give you everything. the economic analysis still really, really matters. But we also had stories that worked with regard to market definition. Market definition still matters in the United States. Whether it should matter, different issue. So with search, with Live Nation, we saw high market shares. These are durable. And that looked very different than Meta, where things were changing. And in fact, continued to change. What's, I think, also important to note is that the sexy cases that were tried during the Democratic administration were actually brought under Trump 1. And for all the discussion of discontinuity of antitrust, of which there's been a lot, these cases went across Democratic and Republican administrations. I think that's very important to note, that we still have some continuity. And I think the biggest change is that in recent years, the state attorney generals have gotten more active. Sometimes it's only Democratic ones working together. Sometimes it's only Republican ones working together. Sometimes they work jointly, Democratic and Republican cases. So, for example, the case filed yesterday against Paramount was only Democratic states, but some of the cases have involved both Democratic and Republican attorneys general. And they've become more active for a few reasons. Number one, more funding. Number two, these are very sexy topics, and that can help get people elected. See Phil Weiser, who has a come from behind, who is well known in this community, who had a come from behind primary win, and he's likely to be the next governor of Colorado. But part of it is also a sense that the states should matter more because they tended not to trust the federal government. And this is part of the new political division in the United States. So we're seeing much more activity in the states, including much more so on the merger side in ways that didn't used to matter before. And we're going to see increasing case law, I think, in that area. I want to focus on remedies. We almost never talk about remedies. I live in California. My favorite movie about remedies is actually the 1972 movie, The Candidate, starring Robert Redford, who unexpectedly wins a Senate role. Very last scene of the movie. He closes the door, talks to his advisor, says, "What do we do now?" That's how I think about remedies in antitrust a lot. We don't think about it until we win. And then they're sort of shocked, like, oh my God, we have to do something about it. So it turns out structural relief continues to be rare. DOJ pushed, for what was a close case, DOJ pushed very, very aggressive, strong remedies. Judge wanted nothing to do with that. And I think the judges have been very, very responsible in thinking about remedies. We could talk a little bit more about the remedies decision in Google. We will. But of course, what do remedies mean? Means we have all kinds of litigation in that space as well. And by the way, that's not just in the US. In Europe, we also have Apple, who contested whether or not they even should be covered under the DMA. That didn't go so well for them. But remedies are complicated. And this just gives you a sense of time and how we sort of think about it. Sometimes the remedies are forward-looking. I think this is an area we don't spend enough time thinking about, but we should be thinking about. For those wondering, this is from a different paper of mine. What do we actually know about the structural breakup cases? I put this here. The Paramount Studios case. Sorry, this is the 1948 Paramount Studios case, not the current one. The empirical record is not strong. So we get to hear like, oh, breakup. I'm like, maybe people should look at the empirical record because in fact, we don't get strong reasons to do breakup. And in a world where we're not going to do breakup, the question is, what do we do and how do we make it work? Remedies are hard. And I think this goes very much against the populist narrative. But my thought always with the populist narrative is read. The best way to deal with populists is to actually show education. I actually want to focus a little more on the actual cases themselves because I think that's where things are exciting. Here are some of the big cases, sexy cases. And this gives you a sense of what's happened. Most importantly, government has won in a lot of these cases with asterisks because some of these are being appealed, right? We have some liability wins. We have, I would add here, the FTC Microsoft investigation, for which there's no complaint yet. And there are a lot of private action and state cases I don't bother to include because it's the difference between being in the Premier League and any other football league. Overall, this is a very impressive enforcement record. So when people say that you can't win against large companies, that narrative is also false. And we could talk about more of the cases. I'm going to go into detail. This is, I think, the most interesting case. It was a hard case. This is a case which I think was a close case. There are a lot of things that sort of cut in both directions. The payments to Apple were interesting. This has been stopped. The question is, who's really benefiting the most from it? So to me, the question is, at one point, the judge said, why isn't Apple in the case? It seems like I've got questions for Apple. I also have questions, which is, who has the leverage? It wasn't clear to me that it was Google that had the leverage to Apple. By the way, Google was also making payments to Mozilla, which is the only reason Mozilla continues to exist, because that was more than 50% of Mozilla revenues. I think the most important thing, though, for the case is just like this is the most important liability decision since the Microsoft case. It's hugely important for that reason. And we're still seeing sort of the effects. So number one is what didn't happen as a result of the case, right? For remedies, they went against structural remedies. DOJ pushed hard for that. So there was no divestiture. At one point, the idea was going to be, I think OpenAI wanted to buy Chrome. I mean, so you can see both what he ordered, what he didn't order. The technical committee, frankly, looks very strong. We'll see if it works. If you recall, the Microsoft technical committee had more than 40 people. Overall, didn't quite work. And I think that this is a very nuanced remedies decision. And it's certainly worth taking a look at. So we know that it's a close decision. DOJ calls it significant remedies, but Wall Street Journal called it broadly favorable to Google. Which is it? We don't know. When we hear that two very different perspectives are both correct, it suggests we're probably close to something defensible. Even if you didn't believe that Google should have had A, the liability against it, B, even if you didn't like the remedy, it could have been a lot worse if you're a Google person. But if you wanted to see enforcement with a win, this is a really solid win, and with behavioral relief. This is where we are at the moment, just to give you timeline. We already have the attacks on liability for those who don't believe in the case and part of the remedy. And we're waiting to hear the DC Circuit. What's going to happen? Unclear. If you recall, in the Microsoft case, the circuit court was much more conservative relative to where the district court had been. Will we see a repeat of that here? I don't know. Here I'm giving you a movie preview, not the actual movie. Maybe the actual movie will be better. We also have the AdTech case. Successful again against Google. We've got remedies to be thinking about here as well. We're waiting. So again, very interesting. Apple or Epic versus Apple, we're now going to the Supreme Court to deal with this. Just as a reminder, Apple wins on all the federal claims, loses on the state claim. But where does this actually stand? Unclear. I think app stores are complicated places. I think this is an area that most countries in the world are very concerned about. I think it's potentially of even greater concern when we go to questions of AI and apps, etc. And it turns out it's an interesting, I mean, the fact that after the case is launched, both Apple and Google almost immediately drop the 30% charge, fee from to only 15% for small developers means, well, why weren't they doing that to begin with? I think is a legitimate question that people were asking. Epic v. Google works out differently. Number one, it's because it went to the jury. Number two, because to the extent that we care about behavioral nudges, I think all of you who are lawyers say you have a document retention policy. You do this for various reasons. The judge had the jury draw a very negative inference about like, aha, the fact that we don't have documents must mean that they had some documents that they were looking to hide. Or my email gets deleted, my inbox gets deleted automatically every single year at the 1-year mark, not because we have something to hide, but because this is part of good document retention policy. So that was a bit odd, but you know, jury matters. And this is where the sex appeal of the economic experts comes in. You had really, really good experts working on behalf of Epic. It was actually a joint and Berkeley team. And Doug Bernheim and Steve Tadelis, number one, they're both very handsome men. Number two, more importantly, they're very good on the stand. And can explain things incredibly well. And this matters to the jury. So I just note that juries matter. DOJ versus Apple, you know, continuing. It's going to continue for a while. We'll see how successful the case is. We don't know. Amazon, we see the FTC case. This one seems less strong to me. We have state cases. DC has its own case akin to a state case, and then we have some private litigation as well. I'm just going to go a bit faster, Julia, because I know that there's probably time for a question. The FTC case against Meta was just a disaster to begin with. The economic analysis was not strong. I don't know what to say about this case, other than it was not a strong case. I focused on the most interesting part of the case. They insisted on bringing this as a Sherman Section 2. They would have been better off bringing this as a merger case, but they wanted to have a Section 2 case. And I think this is also the difference between DOJ and FTC. The DOJ cases were more carefully crafted. And this is overall what I'd say about the Biden administration. In DOJ, you had someone who was a real antitrust litigator and knew how to focus on case law and case development. And at the FTC, you had someone who had never had a real job before and wanted to bring headline cases. Headline cases that you can't support doesn't go over so well. This is what we know right now about the potential case about Microsoft. Some of us are like, didn't we see this 25 years ago? The answer is same basic theories. Yes, we'll find out soon. Live Nation Ticketmaster, big win for the states. I want to focus on mergers for a second. We've had challenges. Some of them may have been strong. Some of them may have been weak. I never understood Adobe Figma. Right after the decision, Lina Khan tweets, "Thank you for competition policy." When Figma goes to IPO, Figma is down 70% since then. No follow-up tweet of, "Oops, we made a mistake," which actually means Figma's worth less now than Adobe was willing to pay for it. Sometimes you need the complementary assets. HPE Juniper, I want to leave aside because it's highly, highly, highly political. We've had other cases that have cleared or settled. I think the sexy aspect is the AI partnerships and acqui-hires. This is where things are. We're not quite sure what it means yet. We want to be investigating. I agree with that because I have a paper on exactly that where I think that there are some potential real issues. Again, private litigation is active. I want to go to what does the evidence show for regulation. So here's DMA. We know what it does. We know what the enforcement has been to date. Here's what we get from third parties. Again, no real work, peer-reviewed work yet. These costs are very, very real and very significant. So here's what we see thus far. It turns out that there seem to be real losers with regard to the DMA. Again, this is all I would put in the category of qualitative evidence. Again, not particularly great. We get an expert workshop. None of these papers are published yet. But we're not getting strong positive signals that the DMA has been effective. Here's the kind of claims we're getting. Certain features are withheld or delayed. That's very clear. Worse user experience and just less innovation in Europe. Again, Europe is a great museum, but one without air conditioning. So right now, the number I want to focus is on 0. If the idea of the DMA was to improve the benefits for consumers, we don't have any studies of that. When we look at China, we do have a paper, mine. And what we find is, most importantly, we had something like the DMA, but it was faster. And so we can, from a diff and diff perspective, it's a much cleaner thing to study. And what we find is we had less venture capital investment in the covered industries and less entry. So if the point was to produce more competition, it was a failure, just outright failure. That's China. And we had enforcement almost immediately against all the big companies. And you could see, here just very quickly, you can eyeball the change and see what happens. But actually, I want to just quickly focus at the end, and then we'll take questions. AI, so there are plenty of different ways of looking at the AI stack. I'm going to just look at a much more simplified version. Of course, we care about data centers. Of course, we care about electricity. But I think these are areas of the stack. There's been a lot of concern here. We don't have yet a coherent theory of harm in most of these areas, though we have now cloud designation in some countries. So here's what we know at the moment. NVIDIA has a large market share. Is there competition? Yes. Is everybody else building there? Yes. Cloud computing, there seems to be a big three, but competition as well. This is where the Microsoft probe, I think, has been the strongest thus far, of the tying of Azure to Office. Whether or not this is going to go forward, I don't know. But this is where we're seeing action, cloud. Model layer looks competitive. I have some other work on that where we see, in fact, yes, there's a lot of competition thus far. And I think this is where we're seeing a lot of activity so far. The vertical partnerships. I'm not going to spend more time because, Julian, I know we're running out of time. So I'm going to just stop there. And maybe we move to questions. Just say AI continues to be a tough area. I didn't focus on the AI collusion cases. None of them have been outright victories. Some have been losses. Some have been settlements. But those are real. And maybe that's the way to talk about real page. But I didn't want to spend time focusing on that. Julian, I leave it to you.
Thank you very much. Then it was a excellent presentation, very complete, and well, we're now open for comments and questions. I know that Paulo has told me that he has a question. I don't know if anyone else was. Then Esteban.
Thank you, Julian. May I?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Julian. Hello, everyone. Hello, Daniel. Thank you so much for this presentation. It's super comprehensive. It's a fascinating topic in different dimensions. I was wondering if you could expand, if possible, a little bit on one of the items that you brought related to acqui-hires. You mentioned that you're working on a paper on this. I was wondering if you can expand a little bit on that. I mean, I see the interest around the globe for different ways, but I was wondering if you can expand a little bit. How do you see this specific discussion evolving? Is it a matter of thresholds and competition authorities around the world having the right threshold in order to review these transactions that acquire talent? Or is it a matter of theory of harm? Where do you see this specific topic evolving? I mean, in which dimensions do you see the most interesting ones? Because one can argue that this is not a new thing. Companies were brought in the past, but it's a matter maybe of focus, right? Focusing the employees. But I was just wondering if you can expand a little bit on the acqui-hires and.
So I think you're right. This has been happening for a while. So there are different types of acqui-hires. Sometimes I'm going to say something a little controversial. Acqui-hires is not that you're acquiring of the talent. Basically, these are failed companies because they could have just bought the company. And this is just some sort of partial exit. Sometimes it's because we think that these particular people have particular skills, to use the Liam Neeson terminology, right? I'm someone of particular skills, and they want them, particularly in the company, integrate them in, and this is basically an important way to get them in, where you don't have to worry about the non-compete rules. Sometimes there are other potential reasons. There may be some potential anti-competitive reasons. All of this is on the table. So interestingly enough, this is where I think it was Chair Ferguson said there's no one size fits all as to sort of what the potential concern is for acqui-hire. Sometimes it's okay, sometimes it's not okay, but we can't have an overall generalized rules. One question might be that we're structuring to get around merger review, to the question that you're talking about thresholds. Okay, so let's imagine we can look at it. So we can always look at unreportable deals. The question is, now what? Do we have a cognizable theory of harm? Maybe we're somehow limiting an nascent competitor? Maybe. Maybe there's some kind of claim involving, I don't know, maybe some monopsony power. Maybe we think there's something else going on here that we don't like. I think the answer is it's case by case basis. And I think some of these deals may be potentially problematic. Some of these have no problems. But it's, is it worth a serious look? Absolutely.
Great. Esteban, you raise your hand.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Danny. Very useful presentation. And maybe my question is about some topic that you mentioned, and it's the impact of AI in ongoing enforcement cases. You mentioned about this impact mainly in the remedy stage, but do you think this is or this consideration of AI could be impacting at other stages of cases, for example, in market definition and also in contestability and competitive dynamics, mainly because a great part of the discussions about ex-ante regulation of digital platforms have been studied before the widespread adoption of AI. The DMA was enacted at the time when OpenAI was launching ChatGPT. So, how do you think these developments could
This is
affect enforcement?
Esteban. This is why I always wondered, right? What were the tools necessary that you needed ex ante regulation that you didn't have with enforcement? If the concern was, the cases take too long. Not all the cases take too long. Sometimes there were attempts at settlement in Europe. The Commission didn't want them. Some cases go fast. So you raise an important point, which is, does AI change things like market definition? Absolutely, it does. Frankly, since in the United States we look at such highly tailored markets, we can imagine a world where we can have such a highly personalized market that every individual might be their own market definition. We might get to that point, at which point, why are we continuing to do market definition at all? So as an economist, you would say, I've been saying this for years. You probably have been saying it for years. But judges like market definition. It becomes more complicated. It really tells us that it's hard to move regulation when the technology moves so quickly. In fact, the US experience, as you're aware, as someone who studied regulation for decades, as things became more technologically advanced, the US liberalized certain parts of the regulatory structure in telecom and in energy because of the fast-moving innovation. In fact, if we look at the EE.UU Act, the initial legislation did not even contemplate generative AI. This is how fast the market moves. If you're Europe and you want to make a mistake, again, people will still visit for tourism, though not in the summer. If you're countries that don't quite have the GDP of Europe, I don't understand. No, I really don't understand. I think agencies have been very effective around the world, bringing enforcement actions, many very strong enforcement actions. And the question is, why would you stymie in investment in quite this way? Innovation at a time when you need, I think most countries, I think, by the way, Esteban, you're asking also, it's going to matter for not just market definition, but to also get back to what you're saying, it's going to matter fundamentally on the conduct, because it'll get to how sticky all of our default options are when we have a world of AI. Things are fundamentally changing already, some industries more than others. So let's just take certain industries where we've already seen action. Video games. So we had Microsoft, Activision, Blizzard didn't work so well for the authorities that challenged. But even in video games, just the last few years, we've seen massive changes because as a result of AI, you have a lot of small individuals and small studios that can do what traditional large companies did because of the AI. You just need to have some nerdy kid living in their parents' basement who, frankly, can come up with a better game sometimes than a traditional studio like Electronic Arts or Riot Games or even Activision Blizzard. We're seeing a lot of industries fundamentally being disrupted by AI in terms of how the business model works. And I think that's going to fundamentally play into a lot of cases going forward, not just at market definition, but also for conduct. As for remedies, the market is still moving. You know, our empirical work suggests that of the big three, Gemini, ChatGPT, and Claude, they're all growing. What's going to be the more dominant strategy going forward? Because they all have different business models, unclear at this point. Which is why I'm always very reluctant to have a regulatory outcome. But I think you're asking fundamentally the right question. Is AI transforming everything? The answer is yes.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I have two questions, Mariana and Mario.
Thanks, Julian. Thanks, Danny, for this outstanding presentation. Apologies for the background noise. I'm on the way to the airport. I think it's clear to all of us that you're not exactly an enthusiast of ex-ante regulations for very good reasons. Some of these bills are already pending approval in a number of jurisdictions, including Brazil. Assuming there will be or there would be ex-ante regulation, what would be, from your perspective, the key mistakes to avoid?
Yeah, well, once it's sort of like, imagine a bad world. What makes it less bad? So I think so this is going to be not the answer that maybe you were thinking I was going to say. I actually think that procedural fairness matters a lot, that I want to make sure that the parties have opportunities to defend themselves, because the way a lot of this works is simply, we don't like you, we're going to designate you, too bad for you. I'd like to make sure that they have rights of appeal, and that sort of takes away from the whole point of the regulation, where it's like, well, we want to move fast. I'm like, well, you know what? Parties have rights. And I think making sure that they have the right kind of mechanisms, both for due process and transparency, are really important. I'd say that should be fundamentally part of the structure of any rule. Beyond that, I'd say overly broad limitations, also very, very bad, and both as to conduct and to coverage. But again, it's sort of like, how do you make a bad world less bad?
Thanks, Danny. That's very helpful.
Mario, you said you have a question or comment?
Gracias, Julian. Thank you, Professor Sokol. I enjoyed very much your presentation, not just because it confirms all my priors, but you kind of answered my intended question, answering to Esteban, but my own perspective is that in Latin America, at least, the proper response to our own problems, which is poverty, informality, very low productivity in general, would be, I mean, and we all are, antitrust experts, and we want antitrust to provide all the solutions. But I think that in this case, the solution to our problems are elsewhere, like, I don't know, infrastructure, education. So I know you were presenting the U.S. perspective, but I know you are connected to South America too. So what would you say about that? What maybe other policies? And I'm sorry if I'm taking you away from
No, it's okay.
antitrust,
Because
but
look, we're in a world where every other question is industrial policy. And so here, actually, I think the thing that has benefited Latin America the most, and if you look at the unicorns, they're filling this gap. Regardless of which country we're talking about, many of the unicorns have focused on fintech, because it turns out the traditional banking sector was not promoting, I think, the best. Look, across Latin America, you had a few traditional banks. They tended to, if not, either they were local branches of global banks or they were local banks themselves, all of which had very close relations with family firms. Depending on which country, we call these hijo de firms, right? In both meanings of the word. And there was a thin capitalization across Latin America. And I think fintech has been the thing that I think in the last 5 to 10 years has been the biggest change in Latin America. You've had massive investment in this area, and you have more people connected economically. I think the other change has been importantly in the area of e-commerce. So here's something, people always say, like, oh, look at the strong power of Amazon. I'm thinking, like, well, maybe they never met these two nerdy guys who went to Stanford Business School, who are, by the way, the richest people in all of Argentina. Although I think one of the founders is in Uruguay now more than in Argentina, which is, it turns out if you have a very good user interface, you're going to have people who use it, and you have real competition. It didn't matter that Walmart had been in Latin America for 25 years. It didn't matter that Amazon was allegedly dominant. No, Mercado Libre said, we're going to have a really great user interface, including for people whose literacy is not particularly strong, and it's an amazing platform. I think Amazon, Walmart are also amazing, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, here we have a situation where we actually have a Latin multi-Latina that's across the region, and it shows that in a lot of areas, there's real competition. Does that mean that there aren't potential problems? I know Mercado Libre has been under investigation in a few places. I'm not speaking to that. I'm just saying you have real dynamism across Latin America, particularly in the areas, Mario, that you're exactly talking about. Where is it that you have everyday consumers that care? They care about, do they have access to money? And can they utilize that money? If they have products, imagine every single little like artesania store in some little rural village. Because of social media, they're able to have discovery, not just in the big cities, but also globally for their products. And then you just need to get the products to market. So actually, it turns out e-commerce is really helpful for MSMEs or PMEs, as you would call them. I think this, we don't hear enough of the positive stories about digital competition in Latin America. And I would say e-commerce and payments are those two stories. We only hear the negative stories.
Thanks, Danny. Anyone else can have a question? If no questions, we will ask Danny to give the traditional concluding remarks.
Right. So first of all, thank you, Julian. Thank you, everyone, particularly from Argentina. I wish everyone great success later today. We can only hope for a Argentina-Spain final. And the last time that there was such a final, I believe Argentina became independent. So we hope for that. As to substance, digital markets have fundamentally transformed I think, our lives in important ways. Do we need to have vigilance as competition authorities? Absolutely. Are there some good cases there? Yes. So here's where I'd say sometimes the best cases are not the sexy cases. So think, for example, we tend to focus a lot on the B2C companies because that's where, people say, well, they're large. Historically, if you look at cases, many of the best cases were not the sexy companies, but the best cases were ones where you actually found behavior. And sometimes this is going to be in the B2B realm, less sexy. Sometimes this is going to be in sectors that are less sexy. So we could imagine maybe all kinds of problems in a B2B agriculture platform or in healthcare. I think that there are real cases here. The one thing I would say is we should always focus on companies that seem potentially significant. I'm not saying that we shouldn't focus on that. What I am saying is we should maybe open our eyes to the fact that when we look at platforms, they're everywhere, and the impact of AI, it's everywhere. And maybe there's some other areas that we should also be looking at where we're likely to find good cases on the law, where we have economics to back it up, and we don't spend enough attention really focusing on those areas. And I think increasingly in areas that we care about, pocketbook areas, we don't have enough focus because increasingly we have political constraints as to the kind of actions to bring. And I'd say that would be a roadmap that I look forward to, particularly in a Latin American context. Focus on who's actually raising price. This is going to sound crazy, but maybe we should focus on high prices again. And we focus on high prices because of potential anti-competitive conduct. The shift had been to focus on zero markets where we're not actually seeing higher prices. It's a hard political sell, especially when inflationary pressure is rising everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Danny. It was a great pleasure. And I invite everyone for the next breakfast. We will be on August 27, and we're going to have Sandra Marco Colino, who is a professor at the University of Hong Kong, giving the Chinese perspective about this fascinating topic. So I hope to see you then, and thank you very much for participating in today's breakfast. Ciao.
Gracias, Julián.
Gracias.
Thank you,
Thank
Professor
you.
Sokol. Bye.
Very good.
Good day.
Excellent. Goodbye.